Hello and welcome to Coffee with the Commission. Today we will be discussing commissioner experiences with having a WMC investigation authorized against their license. Joining us today, we have a panel of commissioners who will be sharing their experiences and providing a few nuggets of advice. We have Dr. Harlan Gallagher representing Congressional District 8 and Dr. Mary Curtis, who is our internal medicine pro tem. There are also various members of the WMC staff on hand to answer your questions and help guide us through this conversation. Just so everyone understands, this is a pretty informal conversation. Our panelists are each going to take turns sharing their experiences, and then we will use the rest of our time to answer your questions. You can use the question portal in the GoToWebinar module to ask questions throughout the presentation. Or during the Q&A time, you can raise your hand using the raise hand function, and I'll unmute you to ask your question. And just so everyone understands, we cannot discuss specific licensing applications, open cases, and ongoing investigations in this forum. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gallagher.
Well, we're glad that you could join us today, and hopefully we can answer questions that you may have. My name is Harlan Gallagher, and I have just recently joined the Medical Commission this past spring. And one of the reasons why I was interested in joining the Washington Medical Commission is because in 2017, I did indeed have an investigation opened against my license. And it's the first time that anything like that had happened. I've never had any lawsuit. And it was just to me a very sort of confusing and process by which I felt like I didn't know all of the detailed parts behind the scenes that I now know now, and believe that the more we can transparently share how it works, I think the more at ease all of our physicians and physician assistants in our state can be, knowing how truly I think rigorous and what's the word? Both supportive of the process and really trying to be focused on the educational pieces that the commission really is. So I practice emergency medicine for a Democratic group and staff emergency departments that are based in Pierce and South King counties. With that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Curtis to introduce herself.
Good afternoon. So my name is Mary Curtis. I am a recently retired primary care internist, although I also did fellowship in pulmonary and critical care medicine and practiced that for about 5 years before moving to the outpatient internal medicine arena. My letter arrived soon after I'd moved from active to per diem staff in 2016, the day after I'd had shoulder surgery. So it was like, oh, and I need to do this in 2 weeks. Wasn't sure what to do. Luckily, I worked for a large organization which had drilled into us that if you ever get anything that sounds like it might lead to a lawsuit, to reach out to risk management. And in doing so, they go, oh, your malpractice insurance includes defensive license. And so they put me in touch with an attorney who had experience working with the commission. And I think that if you do use an attorney in making a reply, and that's a very personal choice, have someone who has experience with the commission. I think it helped the process. And one of the first things that the attorney was able to do for me was to get me an extension so that I didn't have to try and do things with my non-dominant hand to review the records and write up my reply. And I will say that I somehow didn't connect this investigation with, you know, when we used to get the quarterly newsletters, you'd always flip to the back to see who'd been disciplined for what. It was one of the fascinating parts. I didn't connect it with the discipline part, and that was very naive on my part. And I think that having the attorney there to help me understand the process a little bit, there were still parts of it that weren't clear. was helpful. Dr. Gallinger, did you use an attorney or?
Yeah, I would say I also work for a large health system, and they immediately assigned an attorney who was super helpful in walking me through the process. But again, I think that that's only one perspective, and I think that hearing our perspective as well as the perspective of the commission would be, I think, helpful. And I think that through living through it and now being on the commission for several months, I definitely see there's work that we could do to really more transparently show people how it works. And I know Kelly Walcott has joined us, and she's part of our panel. She can introduce herself as well.
Hello, I'm one of the clinical investigators with the Medical Commission. Anything else you want to know?
How long you've been doing it, maybe? What you did in your previous?
I've been a nurse for almost 21 years, and I've been investigating with the Medical Commission for going on 7 years. And I think it's good to have this kind of conversation with people too. I don't want them to be afraid of us. We're not against anybody or out there to get anybody. So I think it's a good conversation to have. So when they get that letter, it's not as scary as they think.
I will say that one of the pieces of advice that the attorney said is and I think it's not quite true, but she says the commission expects you to fall on your sword. And I don't think that's true, but we do want you to be, and I tried to do it in, when I look at cases, that we want you to be kind of honest about what has occurred, that your responses can tell the story from your perspective based on the medical record and your recollections. But to also kind of like, did you learn anything? Are you doing anything differently as a result? And I think that if we're honest about it, in every patient encounter, we can learn something. Did it go well? Did it go poorly? What could we do differently? And that is one of the things that, when I'm reviewing a case, I'm kind of looking for is, okay, if this didn't go well, even if it was, a miscommunication, what can we do differently to make it better the next time?
I couldn't agree more. I think that it would be foolhardy for any of us that practice medicine to believe that we're perfect and that every encounter that we do is perfectly done or perfectly documented. And I think that that's part of the challenge, is being able to acknowledge that while not all feedback is equal, there's probably something to be gained from every bit of feedback. And so whether you're the one making the response or it's through an attorney, I think having that element of, hey, I'm a lifelong learner and I'm taking this, and this away from it. Even though sometimes feedback can be hard, I think it really demonstrates, I think, the alignment with what our goal is for us to be an educational and supportive part of the process. In addition to just, primarily patient safety, and those ones are often very easy to identify. But those are the very small minority of the cases that we see. A much larger number of cases are fraught with communication and diagnostic and potentially other just situational limitations.
I must say that when I got my letter, one of the things that occurred to me thinking about it was, did I document, everything? And I think, Kelly can talk to this. One of the things that sometimes occurs, particularly now, our EMRs are a bit fragmented. And so maybe we don't see all of the portal communications. Maybe we don't see all of the telephone calls, which are essential for us as reviewers to put the whole thing together. So I think if a licensee is facing this letter, one of the things to help you and to help us is to make sure we get all of the records and that we're not, wait, you talk about a telephone call, but I don't see it in the record. And then that leaves us wondering, did it occur? And I know it probably did occur, but, it's always, giving us as much of the information as you can. And I didn't realize this during my case, and I hope that everything, you know, arrived to the investigators. But being on the other side now, that's one of the issues that we sometimes see.
Well, and being an investigator, and I've also been on the other side, is that's a big thing, is documentation. And it's very difficult when the documentation, especially if somebody hasn't the best penmanship, is very difficult. But yeah, you won't typically get those communication notes unless you specifically ask for them. And those can be really important, since now we have all these portals, all the patients and doctors and everybody else that they communicate through. So that is definitely important. And documentation is really important. It's not documented, it's not done. I think that's a standard. And going back just a little bit with what you guys said, is I think as an investigator, that's one of the biggest things is, I mean, we all make mistakes. It's not a perfect world, but if you don't own up to some of these things, then you're right, it's not helping. And this can be a very educational experience in itself.
I agree.
In terms of the documentation, it's the same rule that you've learned for, don't go back and change anything retrospectively. You know, it's like, oh, no, I didn't document that as well as I would have liked, and I will do better in the future, but don't change the record. I mean, it's like when you had new interns, and it would be, don't lie. You know, if I asked you to do something and you didn't do it, don't tell me you did. You know, just let's move on and let's get it done. And I think that applies to your whole career.
I mean, it seems after these introductory comments and conversation, it would be great for us to hear what people's questions are. That way we can make sure it's valuable use of their time.
Sure. So we'll give people, there are a couple questions kind of coming in, a couple comments, but just to kind of elaborate on an earlier point, somebody said Dr. Curtis mentioned the time assigned after one receives a letter from the WMC. Kelly, can you expand a little bit on how much time someone has to respond to an investigation letter, and any tidbits you might like to add?
Absolutely. And communication back and forth is imperative. So we get totally 170 days to do our investigation. When you get your letter of cooperation, which we call LOC, you have 21 days from the day you receive it to respond to it. And you can call us, and that's fine, but you do have to respond in writing to the allegations in that letter of cooperation. So it's imperative, because, you know, it's not uncommon to go out of town and don't get it. But as soon as you get that letter and you see it, you know, and you're like, oh, it's almost the 21 days, you need just get a hold of us. And it's absolutely workable to figure out a better timeline for you.
So just to make sure, you know, that 21 days, we are kind of bound to that time frame. But, you know, like I said, give us a call, let us know if you need extra time for your attorney to review. You know, just kind of keep that line of communication open. So we have a hand raised. Janet Jordan, I'm going to unmute you if you'd like to ask your question. You might be self-muted, so remember to. Okay, let's see. Mark Murphy, would you like to go ahead?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, Harlan and Mary and others. I have a question. I've served as a reviewer for the commission, and you alluded to the electronic health record. and how it's a bit disjointed. So when the records come, they have telephone encounters clustered, they have progress notes clustered, and some other things, lab, ancillary orders, etc. I mean, it's certainly possible to wade through all of that, but personally, I would find it easier to get the chronologic picture if everything appeared in a truly chronologic order. I know that would require mixing telephone encounters in with other encounters, but I just find it very difficult to get the actual flow of events if you don't have everything in chronologic order. So is it clear what I'm saying?
I just like to say that in all the years of reviewing medical records, so many facilities have so many different programs, and some of them aren't even electronic at this point, and that makes it very difficult because, yeah, you can get them all mixed up like that in sections. It just depends on who you get them through. It'd be nice to have a nice generalized format that everybody's using.
Yeah, I think you must be at the mercy of whoever is providing the records to you. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you don't
Yes.
then attempt to rearrange them. That would be quite an ordeal, I imagine. Is that also correct?
Yeah, I try to keep the records as I got them, just to be completely transparent. And if this is how I get them, this is how I put them in there. It just takes a little bit longer to go through everything and bookmark what you want, going through all that.
And one last thing, if I may, this is unrelated, and if we have time, perhaps come back to it, but I'd like to share something that came out of a case in which I was involved that I think is very illustrative.
Good.
Is this an okay time? Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, I too got the letter, and this involved a neonatal case.
I'm sorry, Dr. Murphy, real quick. Just
Yes,
before, I'm totally happy for you to share, and that's great. I want to remind you, don't share anything personal. This is recorded. This is a public meeting, so try to don't share too many details about the case. Okay.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Suffice it to say that we've talked a little about learning opportunities, and the case in which I was involved, it had an unfortunate outcome, and hence the claim, but it also had a good outcome, and a standard of practice was actually established across. I don't know if it's across all of Washington, but certainly in the Puget Sound area. And currently, every neonate is screened for hyperbilirubinemia. And so, if that's too specific, I'm sorry, but I'm not. At this point, I'm not ashamed of it. I'm happy that something that helpful came out of a very painful case. That's all.
So this is Dr. Bergman. I've been on the commission since 2014, and therefore I've reviewed little hundreds of cases. And what you just described is actually something that we will try and build in to kind of remediation efforts when we do take them, because we do want to kind of create learning for the individuals, but also systematic changes where we can. I would echo what the other commissioners talked about in terms of wanting to really understand what are the learnings that are taken, and that's really something that I always looked for when I reviewed cases. I can give you a couple high-level examples. One where there was a respondent that missed something very, very obvious on an X-ray. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that they did not look at this X-ray, because a first-year medical student with no training could have picked up on the finding. And they had a lawyer write the letter, and the lawyer just tried to defend it, trying to insist that that the standard of care was met, that there was nothing wrong, and there's just no argument to be made there. And so we were left with no other choice, because we never got to hear the voice of the respondent, to finally say, hey, we need to do something about this. And this one finally, fortunately, got resolved through a settlement conference. I actually got to sit down with this respondent across the table from them and talk to them face to face. And it was only at that time where I really got to hear from the respondent and really, got to hear kind of some of the details, that we were able to come to resolution. In that particular case, I actually went back to the panel. We ended up closing it without doing anything. And what I needed to do was hear from this individual that, yes, they understood what had gone wrong, and yes, they had made changes to how they look at films in the future. And so that was a case where that actually turned out well. There's another one I had that was a very, very pricey multi-million-dollar medical malpractice settlement involving an ER doctor. And it was one of these cases where this doctor absolutely missed a whole series of red flags on a case. I mean, it was really an excruciating chart for me to go through as an ER doc and just say, oh no, you didn't ignore that, you didn't miss that. And they did. And of course, the end result is a very significant permanent disability to a patient that resulted in a very, very large settlement. But when I got to the personal statement, what I got was a respondent who said, you know what, not a day goes by that I don't think about what happened to Miss Smith, or whatever the patient's name was. I says, I see so many places where I failed her, and these are the 5 changes I've made to my practice. This is how I do things differently, and this is what I learned from the case. And so despite this being a patient that absolutely had permanent harm for the rest of her life that resulted in a multi-million-dollar settlement, we went to the panel and we closed the case. Because from our perspective, we had nothing else to get from that respondent. They had learned lessons, they had made changes to their practice. Actually, there were some changes that were made to the practice they're involved in. And at that point, all we're going to do is just punish somebody. And that is not the goal of the medical commission, to punish people. It just isn't. And so really trying to understand, if you get one of these letters and you respond to it, what did you learn from the case? How have you changed what you do? Those will go a long way for a panel. You know what, this person, we don't have an issue with them. We are not protecting the public by taking action. We are only punishing them at this point.
I think that's excellent advice and insight. I think sometimes when the attorneys get involved, I think the licensee needs to make sure that their voice is in that letter of response to the commission. That their understanding, I think the kind of malpractice approach of nothing happened here, everything was perfect, when if that is not true, doesn't really serve the licensee in their response. That you want to kind of look at what really happened. If everything was really right, fine, you can say that. And we do have cases that we review where, yeah, everything really was done, the way it should be. But I still think that we want to look at, can I learn something about communication? Can I learn something about documentation? And if a, mistake was made, as in my case, I had to go, yep, that mistake was made. And this is how it happened, and this is what I'm doing differently. So I think that we want to hear the licensee's voice and not just the attorney. Even if the attorney writes a letter, make sure your voice is there and that we can see, whatever it is that you've learned from the experience, and that it's less likely to occur again, that we don't need to take action to protect the public.
Mary, you said something else that's really key there that I want to build on just a little bit. The commission, there's a very low threshold for opening a complaint at the beginning. When these complaints come in, I'm doing the CMT tomorrow, and so I'm reviewing complaints right now for tomorrow. You oftentimes have about 3 lines of information, and you're trying to decide based on, one paragraph or a couple lines of information, is there a concern here that we need to look into it? And so your default is usually, if there's a bad outcome or something sounds off, you're going to open it, you're going to investigate it. And most of the time, actually the majority of the time, once you get more information, you recognize, everything was done great here. And it's a perspective issue. And so one thing you can be reassured is when these things get to panel, it is a panel of peers. There are some public members, but by and large, they're mostly clinicians with formal medical training who are reviewing these. And we're savvy enough to pick up on, hey, actually, in this particular case, this patient was given excellent care. Yeah. And we'll actually say that in the panel, that this patient received A+ exceptional care. And those don't get reported for various reasons. You don't get that feedback, but recognize that, not just because you get a case investigated doesn't mean that there was a problem with the care.
That's true. Thank you.
I would also say to any attorneys that are on the call that, if you're writing on behalf of the licensee, it is important that this isn't a malpractice case, and how the defense of malpractice would maybe a different approach. But when we don't see conciliatory language, even for something that seems like it's pretty straightforward, and certainly it's obvious that the licensee did not look at something or do something that certainly the specialty across the state would have done, acknowledging that doesn't mean that they would be necessarily found at fault or disciplined for it. But by not acknowledging it, it certainly comes across as, well, maybe then there needs to be an educational component to this because we're not seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a question that's probably geared a little bit toward Kelly, and it's, if an investigation takes a very long time, for example, over 2 years, is there anything the physician can do that the commission appreciates that helps move things along?
Kelly, I think you're muted.
She looks like she's moved a bit. I'll actually respond to that one because I actually do have some thoughts. And so, again, usually when these things are a lot of times there is something that didn't go right or went wrong. And I'll tell you, when you get to the point of responding to
on to Team Viewer, are you going to be around tomorrow? Can I call you tomorrow because I'll be at home?
I'll be at home too.
That's
good.
not me. Okay.
Sorry,
but anyways,
I had to find it, but I got it.
Okay. When you do get to that point of having to respond to it, it's really helpful to be able to say, hey, since I found out about this case, I went out and I took a CME course on this and I've learned more about this, and I realized that I did this, and I talked about this with my partners and we developed a protocol around, I'm just making stuff up here. That goes a long way though. And so then when it actually gets to the panel, it's really easy for the reviewing commissioner to say, okay, this stuff happened, and by the way, here's all the stuff that's already happened. And a lot of times what you've done is you've stolen the thunder of the panel. At that point, they're like, well, again, we have nothing else to do. They've already done everything we'd want them to do to learn from this, to kind of make changes. And at this point, taking action only punishes them. It doesn't protect the public. All it's doing is punishing the individual. And again, that's not what the medical commission's about. And so if they feel like the public has been protected, they'll be more likely to close that case.
I have one case that has been, I don't know if it was 2 years, but at least 1.5 years, because it was outside of my expertise, and the licensee being investigated deserved expert input. And then we are sometimes at the mercy of the outside expert at how long it takes for them to review everything, get it back to the investigator, who gets it back to the commission member who's looking at the case. And certainly for my case, we had difficulty getting the full medical records, then difficulty getting some of the imaging. So that took months, and then it had to go to an outside reviewer. So I think that that's where you, or if you have an attorney involved, keep in touch with the investigator. Kelly, I'm sure, can comment, but they are that connection for what's happening with my case. Is there anything else, and sometimes it is simply a matter of, yeah, I'm sorry, but it's taking that long, but it's because we want to do due diligence. We want to be sure that we're getting the best input from the reviewers, so that if it's outside the expertise, as an internist, that, or someone else on, regular commission member, that you're getting the best advice, the best review that we can offer you back to help the commission member look at things. Kelly, did you have anything to add on those long cases?
I think somebody unmuted me now.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. For those long cases, it's sometimes it's a matter of getting records, and sometimes even just the response. Then you find out additional information that leads you to go get additional information. So that can prolong it. One thing for sure that kind of takes a little time is if these people are not updating the DOH website with their contact information.
Oh, yeah.
That can delay, because you'll send out a letter and then you might get it back a week later that it was undeliverable. So would help. That could save a week or two worth of time, trying not to have to track down people so much too, and just responding in a timely manner.
That's an excellent point. I don't even know what the rules are on keeping DOH up to date. Luckily,
They can
I
go
never
right on the
moved.
website. They can go on the website and update their contact information.
So Justin Eckert has had his hand raised for a little bit, but it went down. Justin, did you still have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I typed it in, but I'll just verbally say it. I just wanted a quick clarification. When somebody mentioned earlier, don't ever revise your notes. And I just wanted to clarify, are you saying like just when you're under active investigation, or is it just kind of a general pro tip recommendation that even when there's no known concerns going on, that you should never revise your notes?
I was the one that said that, and I think it's more when you're under investigation. I know when I was in practice, I'd look back on a previous visit note and I'd recognize that something I dictated just made no sense. And so I would go in and, do a correction. The EMR is going to note that I did it on a certain date and time, and that it was a late correction, the same way that you might in a handwritten medical record have, put the single line through it, initialed it, signed it, and written in the correction and put in the new date. So I think you can do those things, but I think that trying to pretty it up so that it looks better, that I think is going to, come across not well.
I would agree with Dr. Curtis. I think it depends on the circumstance. If it's just to have the record be accurate is one thing. If it's timing based, meaning like in my world, if I don't have a note signed or the patient has now come back and admitted to the hospital and then I go in and addend my note, I think that would be something that would not be best practice.
And Janet Jordan, you have your hand raised. Would you like to ask your question?
There, can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Okay, great. So if you get one of these dreaded letters in the mail and, the first one says somebody's reported you, but don't worry about it. You don't have to do anything at this time, but we don't have any idea of what's going on, who or how. How long do we wait before we worry that something's been sent to us that we didn't get in the mail? How, is it months? Is it weeks?
Jimmy, if I may, can I answer that question?
Go for it.
Sure.
This is Frida Page. She's our Director of Investigations.
To answer your question, so what you're referring to is what we call a respondent notification letter.
Right.
And in that letter, it does disclose to you that you've been identified as the subject of a complaint. At any point in time, you can certainly reach out to the investigator assigned to that case. I believe their information is provided to you in that letter. So there's no reason for you to delay. You can certainly reach out to them as soon as you receive that letter, or you can wait. You have the opportunity to provide a response if you choose to do so at that time, or wait later until the investigator contacts you. So there are options. You do not have to wait. At any time, you can reach out.
Great, thank you.
I would say I noticed that our investigators are often including specific questions. And I think as a reviewer, what I'm looking for is both your sort of narrative of the event as well as answering the specific questions. And I think that as a reviewer, that's what's most helpful to me. Dr. Gallinger, you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think knowing the questions and how they're answered is really important. And I think there is something to be said for the interplay between whether it's through the attorney or directly through the investigator. It does go a long ways to just make sure that you're forthright and cooperative through the process. That again, the goal of this is just to be able to get all the information at a time so we can see it and come to a reasonable approach, and we discuss it as a commission. And when it seems like we're not getting all the information, that's not helpful to the case.
I'll also add that sometimes before you even get your response, there's been some communication with the investigator and the reviewing commissioner where they formulate some questions or something comes directly from the CMT panel. And so as an example, maybe you're a surgeon, you had a post-operative complication, and we all recognize that this is something that can happen, and what we might be more concerned about if interested was the appropriate consent done. And so sometimes we'll open an investigation really say, hey, was the patient appropriately consented for this procedure? Did they understand the risks? And so if you get asked a question like that, that's really what we're going to be keying in on. So it's important that you do answer those questions.
And so just to piggyback a little bit on that, we have a couple questions. One are the cases started generally due to patient complaints, or do malpractice cases trigger a review? The short answer to that is both. We receive complaints, whether it's from another state medical board or malpractice or from a patient. They can come in from a lot of different sources. And then the other question, and then I'll let the panel speak, but are all complaints investigated? If not, how is that decided? So just so everyone understands, when we get a complaint, the complaint is then sent to what we call case management team, which is a panel of commissioners and they review the complaint and decide whether or not it's authorized for an investigation. So not all complaints are investigated, and they do go to commissioner review before an investigation is authorized. If anyone else wants.
Yeah, again, I commented earlier in the panel discussion that I'm doing this. This is actually one of my duties for this week is I'm doing the CMT thing tomorrow morning. And so there's 32 cases right now, and I'm going through them. And our threshold for opening them is pretty low. Again, we don't always have a lot of information. And so if there's any concern at all, we usually err on the side of opening, getting additional information. I think the last time I saw the statistics is what, about 60-40, Jimmy? We open about 60% of them at that point. No, less?
Yeah.
Less? Okay.
No, it's about 30 to 40% are open.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's lower than it used to be. But I know by the end, the time you get down to the end, it's only like 5 to 7% of them result in action. So it's a very small percentage of them that actually end up resulting in any kind of action.
I think it's kind of good to point out also that if I'm not mistaken, when they're going through CMT, that these respondent or MDPA's names and information are blocked out, so you're staying unbiased in that decision on whether you open the case as well too. And I don't know if the general population realizes that information is not there.
So Charles Plitcher, you have your hand raised. Do you still have a question? You're unmuted. You might be self-muted. Okay. Well, then He did type a question, so I'm just gonna go ahead and read it. I have reviewed charts for MedMal. Most often there is no negligence. Sometimes to give the plaintiff another option, I suggest the patient take the case to the commission. How appropriate is that?
I think it would depend on, do you think that patient harm was done? Our primary goal is to make sure that the residents in the state of Washington are safe and that our practitioners are practicing safely. So if you think that there is concern for patient safety or the safety of any future patients, I think that for me would be the threshold that I would use.
Yeah, especially the latter part of that statement. To me, again, the role of the medical commission is to protect the public. And so if you think that there is a danger to the public, that somebody's doing something dangerous or consistently negligent, those are cases that we should probably be taking a look at. I'll tell you, the hardest ones as a commission to deal with are kind of the one-off bad outcomes. Because again, everybody has a bad case, everybody has a bad day. And when you have a single case over the career of a physician, I guarantee you every physician in practice is going to have that case. It's just a matter of whether it gets reported or not. So those are oftentimes the most difficult ones for us to look at.
Yeah.
And I think we've already touched on this a little bit, but just to reiterate, how can the respondent reach out to the WMC to be able to speak to the commission? Who should the respondent contact?
Well, they're going to have they should have our information on their respondent notification letter. So probably the good starting point is with the investigator assigned to the case. And then you can go from there, whether it be a staff attorney or whoever else they need to.
Yeah, I think it's, Dr. Bergman talked about being involved in a settlement conference. I haven't had that experience yet. But, you know, even though I may make a recommendation after I've reviewed a case, it really is the decision of the full panel in terms of any action, so that you're not going to interact as much individually with the reviewing commission member.
Yeah, actually, procedurally, I don't think that the reviewing commissioner actually is even allowed to vote on it. I think they present it and the rest of the panel votes. And so it's even one step further that the reviewing commissioner, all they do is present the information and they actually don't even get a vote on what happens.
That's true. Thanks for pointing that out.
And Renita Bullitt, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. You have your hand raised. Do you still have a question? You should be unmuted, but make sure you're not self-muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I joined late. My apologies. But I have a question. I had a terrible traumatic experience with my mom 6 years ago, and I didn't know about the medical commission board. All I knew was to file a complaint in the hospital. No one never followed up with me on that complaint with the doctor that was seeing my mom. And the outcome, the result, we had a disagreement about my mom being placed on a feeding tube. That was something my mom did not want to have, and I was her DPOA, so we had already discussed things in her advance directive where she wanted life-sustaining support and everything, but this doctor was adamant that my mom needed this feeding tube and so forth, so we had a disagreement. And when my mom got discharged from the hospital, maybe 2 weeks later, because she was on rotation with the treating physicians, the doctor that we had started seeing, that was seeing her, he was seeing a prognosis of my mom and that it was good. She was getting rehabilitation in the hospital because she had a stroke. And so when she was discharged to a nursing facility that we thought would be a great nursing facility based on what we viewed on the website. But when she got there, it was a late discharge. We didn't see the discharge summary. A week later, it was just an awful experience. They had my mom isolated, and so maybe a week or two later, I went to the hospital where she was discharged and requested her medical records from when she was admitted and when she was discharged, and I found they had 2 discharge summaries on file. One was from the doctor that we had the disagreement with, that was very negative, stating that she is in poor condition, poor prognosis, no pain medication needed for her. But the doctor we had been seeing who discharged her, his discharge summary said that she had good prognosis and everything. She was to continue with her rehabilitation. So when I look back in hindsight and I saw how the nursing home staff was treating me, like they would look at me like, why are you trying to get all of these resources for your mom or support her in the rehabilitation process when this is not what we're going to do for her? They were trying to pressure me to get her with a feeding tube as well. And so when I found out about the 2 discharge summaries, it dawned on me, well, this must be what they're looking at. No one never went over with me what was in her summary, what was her plan of care. I had to advocate to ask the nursing home, can we get my mom started on X, Y, and Z? It was a very bad experience. I complained to the insurance licensing, the Department of Health and Licensing. It was just really horrific, the stuff that my mom had a motorized wheelchair that she used. They refused to give her a wheelchair evaluation. They didn't want her to use it, saying that it's going to harm all the other residents in the facility. But that was her mobility. That was her wheelchair was her mobility. So it was horrific. The result, my mom wound up passing. I have all the stuff documented, but I didn't know about this resource. I reached out to the Department of Licensing and the Department of Health. And then when I reflect back on the disparities with minorities, people of color, I look, okay, they were not trying to hear me. They were not trying to support and assist me in advocating for my mom to have the support she needed to live her life but she wanted to live. So it was just a horrific experience. And I want to know what can be done to move forward, because nothing ever was done with this nursing home facility. I was even reported to APS that I'm hindering my mom health process and things like that. So I just, nothing, it is just horrible. So I want to know, just moving forward, the accountability factor. No one was held accountable. No one followed up with my complaints. I even made complaints to the nursing home with things that was happening. It was all one-sided. I just never had no due justice or accountability, and my mom passed away after 6 months of that situation.
I know one thing in a lot of facilities, and I believe all the facilities, if you're ever in a situation like this again, you'll always see posted the ombudsman telephone number, and they're there to assist you on these type of issues as well.
So for the caller, I'm very sad to hear this, that you've had this experience. I think at this point, it is, 6 years out, it's not a case that I think the commission would really want to look at. But if you were in a situation again, I think that looking at the ombudsman, and, we do see complaints like this come through at case review. So in future, that might be an option, particularly if you think that the level of care for your mother or other residents is simply not the quality that it should be. But I'm not sure that we as a commission would, I don't think that we would take action now.
So just to be conscious of time, we do have a lot of questions that we didn't get to today. So everyone on the call, I will follow up with you to kind of get some of those settled. But as just kind of a wrapping up this conversation, we have a really good question from the audience that maybe everyone can reflect on, and that's in the spirit of this perspective of the commissioner, and that is, how can the commission use its experience to help other physicians learn from the stories of others and assure that the rest of us don't make the same mistake?
So I hope that there are some of the more experienced commissioners still on the line. I think when the panel meets, we sometimes talk about, you know, how to share these experiences, you know, and whether, but we haven't worked out. I think that they are working on, you know, doing some of this, making the experiences with the commission more educational, and not focusing on punishment. That's not our goal. But I would sure appreciate any suggestions from any listeners.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback. I'm early in my experience as a commissioner and would definitely love to hear the staff perspective, because I think that how do we move from being solely focused on punitive to educational, supporting our practitioners to provide safe practice of medicine for all of the residents in the state of Washington. And I think part of supporting that is like learning and sharing learnings from that. And how do we do that in a formally or informally? That's a great thing to think about.
Yeah, I know we've certainly talked about this issue many times over the years and tried to brainstorm about them. Of course, one of the challenges that these do real cases involving real people, and so you have to be very careful with how you talk about the cases without identifying them. You can certainly do your best to de-identify, to avoid the location, try and change enough of the information to where it doesn't even resemble the case, but it really is problematic to figure out how to talk about these very forward when you're talking about real cases, real people, and real patients.
Are there any closing thoughts from our panel before we wrap up for today?
I just want to say thanks for those who took time out of your lunch to listen and join in. I think that my hope is that people see the commission as someone who wants to partner with them to provide the most safe practice of medicine possible, and that we are here to help equip and educate.
Thank you for listening and meeting with us today. We appreciate all your input, and I think that hopefully understanding the process will make that letter a little less to strike fear, that our goal is to provide the best medical care in the state and to protect the public, and responding to those letters forthrightly can help us and help you in that goal.
And don't be afraid to reach out to the investigator. I mean, we're here to answer the questions and make the whole process go smoother for you.
So I would just like to thank everyone for attending and participating. This session was recorded and it will be available on our website in the next few days. We encourage you to share it with your circles and reach out to us with your questions. And so on behalf of all of us at the Washington Medical Commission, thank you and take care.